Kayla, a blind girl, lived with her mother and cousin. The movie starts as she and her cousin go out to a cliff so she could get some fresh air. Her cousin gets distracted for a moment and Kayla decided to wander off a little without knowing she was heading for a fatal downfall on a cliff. Charles, a man that was standing by, sees her as she moves on and stops her from taking further steps into her fall. Kayla then goes home and tells her mother about it, who says that she would have loved Kayla to thank Charles the next time that she met him. Kayla does the same thing. After some days, she meets him and decides to thank him in person, after which he then takes her back to her home. Charles develops an interest in Kayla as he starts to bring her gifts, after which they fall in love and start to go out day after day. Later, Kayla's old-time boyfriend Stone, who was in prison, comes back and decides he wants her back, and he tries to force himself on her, but she struggles and her cousin then comes to save her, after which Stone runs away like a coward. She then meets her lover Charles the next day and decides to mold a sculpture of clay of him to have a feel of his face and remember him, which went very well. Prison Stores hears about Charles and decides to warn her to stop seeing him or face the consequences of being hit with a stone or killed. Meanwhile, Charles goes to the hospital to consult if Kayla could regain her sight, and the nurse confirms that there was a 50-50 chance that that could be a possibility. He and Kayla then go to church to pray about it. Later, the two lovebirds are chilling and Stone shows up to intimidate Charles with a gun, but he is not moved to leave such a beautiful and pretty face, even though it was blind. The next day, Kayla's mother and cousin are seen running to warn her that Stone was on his way to kill him. But they reach and Stone fires and shoots Kayla's mother to death by mistake. The scene changes to Ken, who was having trouble with his fiancée because she flirted with other guys and came home late. In short, she was abusive. It then turns back to Kayla, who was now left with his cousin since her mother had died. The cousin revealed that his mother wanted him back in Lagos, which would leave Kayla alone as Charles had gone to Accra to sort out something. When Charles came back, he proposed to Kayla that she should move in with him because she had no one to take care of her, and she accepted. They later went to see a doctor who said that this could be a possibility that Kayla could see because with new technology that was easy to happen. They later started the surgery that would take some days. Charles later tells Kayla that he would go home to clean the house in anticipation for her arrival back at the house while she will be able to see. The doctor, who is Dr. Cromwell, comes to do the unbandaging after so that Kayla could see, and Kayla asks for 20 minutes to wait for Charles, who would be there any minute because she wanted him to be the first person that she was going to see. And the doctor accepted even though he had the flight to catch some minutes later. As Charles was going back to the hospital, Stone and his goons attacked him and left him for dead. The 20 minutes elapsed and they decided to go with unbandaging without Charles. So in this case, Kayla was able to see without Charles being there. Kayla heard the news of Charles' death and goes into depression. Because of that, the doctor decided to adopt her as his daughter to take care of her. The scene then turns back to Ken, who got dumped by his fiancée. The doctor then holds a celebration at his house, where Ken then meets Kayla, who was depressed, and finds an interest in her because she was beautiful, I'll tell you. He confronts the doctor, who advises him on how to approach her and tells him about the death of her former lover, who was Charles. Ken approaches Kayla, who was resistant at first, and he persisted and made her heal from the tragic event of losing Charles. He tells her he lost a friend too and is still hurt about it. And when he revealed the photos, it turns out that Ken was revealing Charles, who was his best friend. But Kayla couldn't recognize the photos as he had never seen Charles' face before he disappeared. She later starts to fall in love with Ken, but he sometimes says things that Charles used to say, so she snapped. Ken tells her she should move on from it or maybe he'll never come back. Later, Ken received a call that his lost best friend was found in a hospital, and it happened to be Charles. Ken takes Charles home and arrives at Ken's engagement party with Kayla, which then breaks his heart, but he could not reveal anything to his friend who found happiness. Later, Kayla is introduced to Charles by Ken, but Charles doesn't utter a word for fear of Kayla recognizing his voice, so he leaves. As he tells the gate man to open the gate, Kayla hears his voice and recognizes that she follows him upstairs at the outside lounge. She asks him if he was her lost lover, and he refused. She asked him a hypothetical question: if he would fight for a girl that he formerly loved and lost her, and that was because she was married at this moment. And then he said he would not do that, and she left. She then started coming to him frequently because she was convinced it was him and asked him to tell her about himself. He explained how she loved a man and didn't show up. She pleaded with him to reveal it was him, but Charles did not want to break his friend's heart or marriage. He told her to focus on her future with her husband, who was a good guy that loved her, and still continued to say that it was not him that she loved back in the day. Ken noticed that Kayla was sad and asked her if anything was wrong, but she refused to tell him anything. Kayla then goes to tell his foster parent, who was a doctor, about Charles, but he said that he couldn't be the one because he was dead. She then asked her father to confirm if it was him because he had seen Charles before he disappeared. So he agreed and he went to check. And as he saw Charles from a distance, he realized that it was him, but decided to cover up and say he had never seen the guy before for the sake of Ken. Charles then looks at Ken romantically, playing with his former lover and girlfriend. She later continues to stare at him, and he tells her to leave him alone. He warns her that he would complicate his friendship with Ken. Charles talks to Ken and asks if he would leave the house and find another place, but Ken argues until he was convinced. Upon hearing this, Kayla decides to make a blindfold herself and build a sculpture of Charles as she remembers it back in the days. After she was convinced about this, after she finished making the sculpture, she was convinced that Charles was a lost lover that she had left. She then came back to grab him and led him to her sculpture, after which he realized that he was caught. He then confessed that he did this for his friend as she was being married to him the next day. She then went on to be angry at him, but he justified himself, stating that he did not want to hurt their newly formed bond. Ken then suspected that Charles was having an affair with his soon-to-be wife, so he brought the family together and then pointed a gun at Charles to confess what was going on. But Kayla then jumped in front of him and confessed that she loved Charles and it was Charles who had begged her to stay to marry Ken. She explained how Charles had been there for her, gave her sight, and led her to be the woman that she was at this moment. Ken then said that he knew about the whole thing and wanted her to admit that she loved Charles so she would be with him. Ken is then seen going to see Charles and telling him he is proud of him and then decides to leave the scene. This is how the movie ends, the end.